My name is Mikołaj Kunicki. I'm the director of the program on Modern Poland here at the European Studies Center at St. Antony's College. This is a very special evening for us. As you know, Poland went to polls for the 9th time since 1989, since the rebirth of democracy in Poland. And the outcome of the elections, national elections, is created somehow unprecedented situation. It's not for the first time that the president and prime minister will come from the same political parties, but this is not exactly very usual, I would say. But there are at least 3 unexpected consequences of the vote that took place 3 days ago. First of all, for the first time since 1989, one of the parties, that is the Law and Justice Party of Jarosław Kaczyński, won the absolute majority in Parliament, majority in Senate, and that simply means that PiS, or PiS, will be able to govern Poland without forming the ruling coalition. This is really unprecedented, and I think this is a revolutionary development since 1989. Just to repeat basically the figures, I will give you again the number of the percentage vote translated basically into number of seats, parliamentary seats. Law and Justice Party 37.5%, which basically means 235 members of parliament. Civic Platform, just 24%, which basically translates into 138 seats. Then we have basically the anti-establishment cookies movement, which comes close to 9%, which means 42 seats. And then finally we have another new political group, Nowoczesna Polska, or Modern Poland, which essentially got 7.6%. There are other unprecedented developments considering this specific vote. For the first time, the left did not qualify in the parliament. And I'm really sure, actually, that this specific subject will come up in our debate, in our discussion. We also have the rise of populist and anti-systemic parties, such as cookies, but this is not such a new development, because we can think in the past about the movement of Janusz Palikot, for example, during the last parliamentary elections. We can think about the League of Polish Families, but perhaps this anti-establishment group is somehow different than the previous political movements of that sort. Obviously we are going to have numerous questions, actually, how this whole thing came out. We will try to also actually think about the possible outcome, ramifications of these elections on domestic but also international levels. And we will try to address basically all these issues with the help of our distinguished speakers. We have the great pleasure to welcome 2 distinguished journalists, political commentators. Jacek Żakowski to my right, who's contributor to Polityka Weekly, but also Gazeta Wyborcza, and someone who is really very prominent, actually, in Polish mass media for the past 2 decades, more than 2 decades. We also have Bogusław Hrabota, who is the chief editor of Rzeczpospolita Daily. So not only we have 2 distinguished political commentators coming from Poland, but the 2 journalists who really represent actually different political persuasions, if I may say so. In addition, we have 2 distinguished scholars. Unfortunately, at this very moment, Professor Ania Gwiazda from King's College is probably sitting on the cab, trying to get here from Gloucester Green. But we have Professor Jan Zielonka from St. Antony's College. What we would like to do is that before we launch the debate, I ask in advance our guest to give us a short 5-10 minute general analysis, basically, of what happened. So I would like to ask first Jacek Żakowski.
Could we change, because Bogusz prepared some data and I will follow it.
Absolutely. So Bogusław Krakota.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's great to be here. I'm first time in Oxford. I'm impressed by the city, by all of you sitting down here. We have a presentation, just as you see some slides on the screen, presenting the main actors of the game. And what I would like to contribute at the very beginning is just to give you some basic questions and some basic answers, just following our formula of Q&A. So the basic question is, who are the winners of this game and who are the losers? So what about winners? Absolutely, number one winner is Law and Justice, this semi-conservative, socially oriented party appealing to national and patriotic values, Eurosceptical, Catholic, and a bit xenophobic, supported by mid and low voters in 13 of 16 Polish districts. As you see, they got finally 235 mandates in parliament, so they have majority. Another winner is Kukiz 15, anti-establishment party led by Paweł Kukiz, rock star and a social activist. It's really difficult to define the program of this party. The main slogan he uses is changing the state, changing the constitution, changing political elites. His party collects different people, including the leader of Young Nationalists and the musician Piotr Liroy-Marzec, rapper and provocateur. And the third party, who's a winner, is Nowoczesna of Ryszard Petru. Strict translation is a modern party, but it's better to say that the party of progress. Led by former Leszek Balcerowicz assistant Ryszard Petru, charismatic economist, free, market-supported, liberally oriented, pro-European and realistic. In election, the Party of Progress was supported by educated mid-age voters with the biggest success in big cities. His party is a collection of highly educated professionals. And losers, some of them present in the parliament, some of them not. So what about the main losers? This is Platforma Obywatelska, the civic platform, ruling last 8 years, the former party of Donald Tusk, ruined by scandals with the biggest stars moved away just before elections, led by non-charismatic, although hard-working woman, former magician Ewa Kopacz. The second loser is left, left, united left, consisting of former post-communist SLD, Union of Democratic Left, and the Janusz Palikot movement.
And Greens.
Yeah, the coalition get 7.65 just 0.45 from the level of 8% target. And the new party, Razem, that's a bit similar to Podemos, let's say, in Spain, who is also trying to go to parliament, but they failed. Another loser is Janusz Korwin-Mikke. That's a person maybe you know, extreme conservative, anti-European party led by very, very old guy, 75 years old, this feuilletonist and author. Maybe you know him from Bastards, that he presents very strange opinions from time to time. And the last loser is PSL, Polish People's Party. That's a representation of farmers. I think it's not a peasant party, because it's much closer to the idea of mafia, of nepotic mafia just conquering some central institutions. Maybe I'm too strong for them, but they are nepotic for sure. And what the campaign was, not put out very much, focus on economics and social matters, not so much intellectual and pretty superficial, promising and personal, instead of being close to the program details. Focus on a widespread news, refugee problems, for example. Who will make government? Law and Justice, solely. The party won elections grabbing a majority of mandates. They accumulate all possible powers, president, government, and speaker. but they not have enough mandates to change the constitution. That's a very important matter. What will be the policy of new government? Arrogant, for sure, socially oriented, pro-union and anti-Russian, Eurosceptical, fit with a number of common fears, and creating fears above, but not following the collision course with EU or NATO. Who's running the show? Jarosław Kaczyński himself. That's from me. Jacek.
That's Jarosław Kaczyński. You must remember this face. If you meet him here, that means Britain has trouble. What does it mean? I mean, it's very difficult to say, because we must make a clear distinction between what politicians in Poland used to say during campaigns and what they do after that. It never goes one after another. So we can only expect what will happen, and I think we can make some expectations or describe some parts of the future if we try to analyze the three vetoes made by President Duda just yesterday to three new bills adopted by the outgoing parliament. The first veto was concerning the extension of the Kyoto Protocol, which is evidently not important for Poland, because we met Kyoto Protocol standards years ago, and we have no problems with that at all. I mean, that's symbolic. What kind of symbolism is in this veto? Why should he veto this kind of a bill? The official explanation is that he vetoed because there was not properly prepared measure or evidence of consequences. But there are not consequences. That's the problem. So why? The day before he flies to Paris to meet the French president, in the city where the next COP conference will take place just in a few months. So why? Weeks. So why? First of all, because just a few weeks before, he signed a law limiting using coal in private houses in Poland. That was very controversial, so he signed this document and he vetoed the other one. But there's also another kind of symbolism. The major symbolism of this fact is nobody will tell us what to do. We will do what we like to do. There are no international agreements, no international law, whatever, that will determine Polish internal politics. Very important for those who used to vote or who voted this year for the Law and Order Party. The other veto was concerning privatization of public forest. In fact, the bill was adopted to make it impossible to privatize forest in Poland, because it's the majority of it, I mean, like 95%, as far as I remember, is publicly owned, and it should stay like this in opinion of majority of citizens. The official explanation is that this ban on privatization went not far enough, that it should be totally banned, and there was a slight possibility to privatize a local forest for public purposes, for example, for road. Of course, this kind of possibility is necessary to run the country anyway. So why he vetoed that? Because it's impossible to agree that outgoing government and outgoing parliament did what was the intention of the Law and Order party. There was an extensive political campaign throughout last year, and I believe 1914 as well, to not to legalize privatization of forest in Poland. So what Duda intended to do was to show that there is only one party which is able to stand on the ground of national interest. Nobody else. Only we. And there's the third veto, which is also only of symbolic importance, because this too doesn't change anything in physical terms. This is about using of minority languages in public administration, in local public administration. That was the law that in the areas where there is the law that in the areas where national minorities live in Poland, minority languages may be used, may be considered official languages in state local authorities, but not in self-governing bodies. So what he says is, oh, it's too much. It's too much. It's enough if they can speak their language, like Lithuanian, like Belarusian, like German. If they can speak this language in state offices. Why? It doesn't matter. It doesn't cost. In fact, it doesn't change much. This is also the same or very similar situation. The reason is effect of exposition, to show that this is the party and this is the new government that will stand on the ground of the integrity of the national identity of the country. I mean, we have minorities, okay, that's not a problem for us, but this is Poland for Poles. So this is just a matter of symbolic activity as well. Well, why I'm analyzing these three vetoes, which seems to me be very important to understand politics of Law and Order party, because we are entering the time when politics, in its nature, comes back. The government is not an administrator of the country. This is not about GDP. This is not about any kind of administration. This is about the unity, the public debate, the discourse, the identity. That's the matter of coming politics. Symbolism is extremely important. The government of, I'm just coming to that, the government of Tusk was extremely pragmatic. Here comes extremely different politics, in which physical measures are only tools for cultural change. I think this is very important when we look at Poland now. to understand that this is the country in a process of cultural revolution, not political, economic, or whatever. This is the matter of the change, in my opinion.
Yeah. Unlike our guest from Poland, I don't even know personally any of those politicians, let alone socialize with them ever. But I should probably say a few words about the reactions outside Poland. And the message was very clear. You know, Poland resembles Hungary now. It's, you know, xenophobic and fun terrible in the center of Europe. It was not invented necessarily in Germany or Britain. Some Polish commentators said with this. The editorial of Gazeta Wyborcza by Kurski was, Warsaw is now Budapest. Well, I don't know how it will be a year or two from now. I'm not an astrologer. Since I don't know those people, I don't want to have psychological analysis of them. But if I look at those two countries, I think it's a sheer nonsense, this comparison. It is like comparing, you know, to use Giovanni Sartori words, monkeys to stones, not apples to pears, monkeys to stones. I mean, unlike Hungary, Poland didn't have severe economic crisis over the last decade. Poland grew 20%. Unlike Hungary, over the decade, even more than 20%.
25.
Yeah. Unlike Hungary, Poland doesn't have the second strongest party in parliament, a fascist one. Unlike Hungary, Polish politicians never entertain territorial claims towards neighbors. Yes, in both countries, politicians made comments about migrants, for instance, which I found deeply, deeply deplorable. But let's face it, I have heard those comments in all countries I travel. I mean, even in this country, when I hear Theresa May talking about migrants, it makes me think about Orban. Yet nobody would suggest that Britain is now like Hungary. And there is a problem here. There is a problem because, look, if you are a Democrat, it is very hard to suggest that the decisions of the demos is irrational or mad. And I'm particularly uneasy when electoral losers suggest that somehow, you know, the voters were misled or misinformed. I remember it very well in Italy. La Repubblica, each time Berlusconi won, had this excuse. He manipulated public opinion. And now I'm afraid papers like Wyborcza, with some of my friends, wrote the same. Now, why people compare those two countries? Because they believe that there will be exactly a shift from liberal to anti-liberal politics under the new regime. We will see. Yeah? What I know, that the previous government basically blurred the border of what is liberal and illiberal dramatically. Because those who lost those elections, from both PO and the United Left, justified tortures. You know, when some of us wrote a letter, you know, condemning the reactions of Polish, not just politicians but also journalists, the comments they made on decisions of Human Rights Court towards Poland about secret detention sites in Poland. You know, they were just thinking we are mad. the same politicians basically never dared to oppose fundamentalist bishops on numbers of issues. It was the left party which allowed enormous kind of ownership of the church under the government. They basically gave up all those things. And on moral issues, look at Polish abortion law. Look at pure attitude towards civil partnerships. Only on in vitro they made last-minute concession. And I can go on and on this. For instance, if you know, to show that this is where we are in a country, not just those two countries. I'm afraid I could give similar example in most of European countries. This is Europe we are in, and Poland, in a way, mirrors the situation. But the argument is now Poland is part of this rather dubious class of because of the results of the elections. And then I only say, let's wait and see. I might be right, I might be wrong, in the sense that I believe myself that PiS is a totally different party than it was a decade ago. That PiS led by twin Kaczynski is totally different, entity that PiS led by Duda, Szydło, and Kaczynski. And mind, Duda and Szydło not only are younger, speak different language, have different advisors, but they also have political mandate which Kaczynski doesn't. So we will see in the years to come how this play within the party will work. And there is no doubt that we are all scared that they will be returned to the past of 10 years. But I wouldn't really assume that. And in particular, comparing Hungary to Poland I find rather misplaced.
If I can add some comments. As you know, there is a voting time and the time of ruling, and there are two different logics, as you know. So they said a lot of, Law and Justice said a lot of slogans in the campaign, and now they are facing the necessity of just confronting the real problems as a government. And from my point of view, the major question is how much pragmatism and how much ideas. And answering this question, I will tell you that if Mr. Kaczynski, who is a winner, will control powers, president and government, which is not exactly sure. It's still a number of questions about the independence of Mr. Duda, the president of the country. But if the Kaczynski is really as kind of Pilsudski was before the war over the powers, he has a very strange attention to some basic matters. For example, he's not interested in economy. He doesn't care about social problems. He's not interested very much in military and army. Even environment, that's something that he doesn't care. That's out of his point of view. So I think these are the fields which will be very much pragmatically done by government. These are the fields of pragmatism. And I'm not afraid if we will change the way of our economic development pretty quickly. I think that this growth, incredible growth we had last 8 years, almost 25%, will continue. But there are some fields that he will be focused on, and that's really education. There's a protection of national values, and especially these slogans that were taught in the campaign, in vitro, that they were contesting the new law about in vitro. So I think that we can figure that it will be changed pretty soon, probably months. Abortion, they say we have a very liberal abortion law in Poland. And there was a number of slogans in campaign just to cut the possibility of abortion 100%. And this parliament, under Kaczynski, will focus on the matter. Another problem is, as Professor said, civic partnership. No more ideas, no more dreams about this problem to be solved, I think. What about foreign policy? Maybe it's something that is interesting for you. Foreign policy, Polish pro-European course. I think that we have, as Poland, so much important factors in our foreign policy that will make the new government just following the road. They are not able to question the sense of being present in EU. Don't forget that Poland is a beneficient of European funds. They will never do anything against this factor, just contesting the European funds or making a risk of losing European funds. What about the NATO? No question about. Only probably another letter sent to Washington, to Barack Obama or another president about the bases in Poland. That's something that they are focusing on. To have American bases in Poland. Today, under this American government, it's impossible, as you know. Maybe the new one, maybe conservative administration in Washington, D.C. will accept such an idea of making a constant basis in Poland. So, the basic question, how much pragmatism and how much ideas? How much nationalism and how much traditionalism? They are not nationalists. Don't forget that in Budapest, in Hungary, Orban party has a right-side wing. Right-side party just on the right of him, Jobbik. We have no such a party in Poland.
Cookies?
What about cookies? We have completely no idea who is Mr. Cookies. Is he an entertainer or a real politician? Is he a real patriotic guy or maybe Pepe Grillo, like in Italy? That's an open question with no answer today. Just watching people who are in this country, we are not able to figure what will be the course. Generally pro law and justice. They are supporters of some basic, but that's another problem that you know from Europe. Being anti-system or anti-establishment in the system, within a system. They are within a system now. So what I can imagine, only the distraction of formula of this party, I mean the common formula. What will be in the future? I really don't know. But of course, I have a number of threats. I'm afraid of a number of problems that we will have. But I'm sure that Polish democracy is secure.
Well, as it stands, Ania Gredla is obviously somewhere, perhaps on the sky with other stars. And I just wanted to say that before I open the debate and we start basically Q&A, I thought that I would reserve, actually, I would use my right actually to say a few comments and perhaps a couple of additional questions to our speakers. Jan, we can see actually this new verbal discourse, or basically the verbal construct called Central Europe, coming back in the case of British and Western mass media, and I think you pinpointed what Central Europe or Eastern Europe actually means in its new use, that it stands basically for parochial, for tolerant, nationalistic and chauvinistic. So you are actually an expert in mass media, and perhaps if you could also add something to this, actually, I would be very grateful to hear. As far as there she is. As far as Jacek Żakowski is concerned, I just wanted to come back basically to your remarks on treating basically this vote as some sort of vote on identity, because we have to basically remember about the external factors that influence this vote, and I think that refugee crisis is clearly definitely there. The crisis in Ukraine is definitely there, and perhaps the shadow of Putin's Russia. But you don't have to answer my comments and questions now, because now we basically have Anya's turn to offer her initial assessment, and I think after that we are going immediately into Q&A. Thank you. Okay, you may try, but that is going to take some time.
It's just because I wanted to show some numbers.
Okay.
So maybe we should have a round before she
Absolutely.
starts.
Absolutely. Let's have a round before actually Anya sets up her PowerPoint presentation. So we'll take the first round of questions actually from the audience. There is Peter Reina. We will take 3 at one time. Okay. So Peter Reina first, Jana Hansen second, Stefan Schwed third.
I should have thought that if one party has a majority, it's a very good thing in any country. Now, I was a little bit disturbed that none of you touched what is the most important problem in Poland at the moment is the National Health Service. Now, all the succeeding governments promised to have National Health Service. It is, it's in catastrophic situation. I hope that this would come when the government has a majority there. Secondly, I'm rather puzzled why Hungary has been brought in every time. Now, it's a very latest argument there. Why is it that nobody is talking about that Poland took so many thousands of Ukrainians in Poland? They are there. Chechenians, much more than the Germans or any other countries taking. And the other thing is that, well, there was a taboo that Hungarian Prime Minister is there, and I'm hoping that Poland would not get the same way. But I think what should do is to give them a chance, and I hope this will carry on.
Jana, please.
Thank you very much. You've spoken a lot about the leadership in the parties in Poland today. Could you say something perhaps about the Parliament? What sort of institution do we have as the Polish Parliament now? Who are the new deputies who've come in? Is there experience there? Will this be an effective and functioning institution, especially as we're letting the left in it as well? What sort of role do you see the opposition playing in Parliament? We always forget about the Parliament. We look at the individuals, we look at the leading personality.
Stefan.
Stefan Schwed, research associate at the Center for International Studies here. I wanted to ask you about turnout. There's been a lot of rejoicing in Poland about a relatively good turnout. I don't quite understand that. I mean, the turnout in Polish elections for the past decade has hovered around 50%. It's now around 51%. That still strikes me as very low, given how important this election supposedly is. This means that the party which now will govern alone in the Sejm, which receives 38%, was voted for by about 5 million people. It's about a sixth of the electorate. Is there a problem that we don't discuss enough? That is the turnout. I'm just back in my other life. I'm an election observer, which is in Belarus. We don't want to reach the levels of Mr. Lukashenko's 83%, but still it strikes me as incredibly low, 51%, the rejoice that I see in Poland about this. Is this a problem? And the second issue, which I think also touches on one of the campaign issues, that is the the electoral reform in Poland. If you think about it, these are 5 million voters who voted for this formation that will now lead the country independently. Is there a problem with the voting system we have and how these votes are translated into seats in parliament? Is that something we need to think about?
Who would like to start?
Well, I can say something about the healthcare system. It is not true, it's really completely, it's not true. As you know, we had a number of reforms. Now we have NFZ system. There's it's a little bit different in England. As you know, we have some
Contributions.
personal contributions, just about 5% for the fund, and it's refunding maybe 80% of services all over Poland. The public system, because we have 20 systems just completely private. So I hear a lot about criticism about this system, but it works. We have some special problems, for example, with oncological treatments. And but of course, it was one of the topic in the debate. But I don't think we should expect very strict and fast reforms. Probably new government will keep the system, maybe refinancing the deficit from the budget. And it's for sure. That's for sure. Because as far as I know, we promised 6% versus 4.5% that government of Eva Kopacz contributed. So probably the system will be kept, and the personal contribution will be not increased, but the budget will finance these holes in the system. The deficit money we need. It was said in the campaign, but we don't expect big reforms in 2016. Maybe next year. It's not a priority. What about Central Europe and the Visegrad dream? Don't forget that Visegrad dream, it was a dream of early 90s. Visegrad is the union of Central European countries consisting of Hungary, Slovakia, Czechland, Poland. That's all. Romania aspires to be in it. But today, real interests among countries are so different that the common policy is impossible. Now, for example, Putin is a case, because Orban and Czech and Slovak governments are close to Putin. They're just looking for some assistance from Russia. As you know, there's a problem of nuclear power station in Hungary. It was built by Russians, and now just trying to increase, to develop energetical sector in Hungary. They need to work with Russians. We have completely different problems. So, the number of interests that we have in common is so little that we are not able to construct, governments not able to construct a very strict Central European policy. But there is a threat. The threat is that maybe these countries would contribute too much nationalist ideas to the Union that will change the balance of ideas in the Union. That's a threat I have, personally.
We have to remember that PiS actually in its program mentions Visegrad as one of the priorities, but I fully agree with what you said. What I think is the Western reaction is not so much Visegrad, it is old and new members. Mm-hmm. And this is what they bank here. Oh, you are new members. Well, this is new versions of it, I remember they were all, they used, for the last 20 years, they called us post-communists. I will die as post-communist, I cannot help, But I always ask the Spanish colleagues who love this, this, and talking about new members as a Soviet bloc, yeah? I ask them, how many years you had to wait before people stopped calling you post-fascist, Nobody called them any longer this way. But this persists, 2 days ago, I had a long conversation with a journalist from Corriere della Sera, and she constantly was coming with new and old. Now this division is even sharper. Of course, in the context of refugee crisis. But I said to her, look, this is much more weak distinction, the distinction today we have in Europe between creditors and debtors, between those who are in Euro and outside, between those who are exposed to North Africa and those exposed to Putin. I mean, these cleavages are very serious, but they somehow, this is in particular new old members, it's the othering. It's Orientalism to some extent, and it's sometimes deserved. I myself found comments of politicians from this part of Europe on migrants utterly disturbing. And it doesn't justify them that similar comments were made by Salvini in Italy or Wilders in Holland. But so there is a problem here we have to address. But they never work together. Why? I mean, there was always this beauty. Hungary and Poland, there was a beauty competition. Hungarians never wanted to wait for Poland to join the Union. They always were saying, why these Germans are waiting for Poland? They are, totally unsuited, and we can join tomorrow. Look how history has changed. But I remember I said today to my students in the morning, when I invited after Copenhagen this summit, which decided to enlarge Europe, I invited on the day it finished to Florence for dinner in a beautiful restaurant with a view on Ponte Vecchio, chief negotiators from Poland, Italy, and Hungary, to report on the negotiations. They were not on speaking terms. They didn't talk to each other. They were so furious, I can explain why, but I don't want to keep it.
Well, as far as the new parliament is concerned, there are 300 new members in 460 chamber. So, let's say there's a freshman parliament, and we don't know what does it mean. Some of them has some past. For example, activities in nationalistic parties or whatever. So we recognize them, but the majority of these new members, it's impossible to recognize for most of us. And for the press, it's really a big problem. So we also know that the parliamentary system is not effective in Poland. I mean, the way the law is adopted. That's a big problem, that you can change a bill even in the last moment, just before voting. So we have many problems with different bills. Imagine what happens if those 300 new absolutely new members, and many of them have never been in politics before, on any level. I mean, also not in local level. So how will they adopt to these procedures? As far as tournament is concerned, well, even in '89, we had only 60%. And this was what was a mistake there then, yes? The independence of the country. So I think we must agree that like 40% of citizens are self-excluded permanently. I know that this is that not all of them are excluded in every election, but this is average for Poland. So what we still miss is only 10%, in my opinion, not so big group. Why? We have this in some sociological research. More than 90% of Poles believe that their life doesn't depend in any way on politics, on political decision, on the government. So, well, if people, I don't know why they vote so. Perhaps because their parents used to vote as they used to go to the church, or some other traditionalistic reason. Because the standard
reality show,
yes. But the case, in my opinion, the case of this election is important not because they are not so much in favor for the Europe and so on and so on. I think that this is a major turn. Timothy Snyder published an opinion that the new wave of Euroscepticism or skepticism towards democracy is the product of globalization, of the second wave of globalization, like the fascist movement was the product of the first wave of globalization. In my opinion, what we see in Poland is the part of this process. It's not about who rules, it's about what rules. So, what rules? Modernization, as a very important part of politics, but modernization without modernism, without cultural change. This is the substantial difference. What it means without cultural change, it means without European identity. Identity is national identity. Identity is my religion identity, local identity, and that's all. It has very serious consequences in every field of political activities, not only in Poland. If we look at the Czech Republic, if you look at Slovakia, if you look at Hungary, if you look at France, the Snyder wave is moving throughout Europe. So this is, if I believe this is important what happened in Poland. It's not because what will happen in Poland, but because what will happen in European Union, in our international environment, and so on. That's the importance, not the I don't know, taxation, for example, or the health service, which is very important, of course, for aging people like me, especially, but that's not the major problem of politics in Poland this time. So.
I want to address the question about the new parliament, and I think a very important issue is the fact that there was some increase in the representation of women. So if we look at the numbers, right now 27% of all the deputies are women. So there was an increase from 24% to 27%, which I think is a very positive development. The question about turnout is very important because obviously if we look at turnout over the past 20 years, we can see that the average turnout in parliamentary elections in Poland is around 48–49%. So the very fact that this time we had a little bit above 50%, shall we be happy about it? Probably not. We should start asking questions about civic participation in Poland, and I think it is a very important issue. The question why the Poles do not want to participate, or how can we encourage participation? And if we talk about participation, it's a very important element of any democracy. Obviously, it is a vital issue. So electoral turnout is problematic in Poland. One of the questions, how can we address it, is it through institutional reform? And obviously an institutional reform could be an answer. So first of all, when we talk about formulas, we can use right now, we have don't, and don't favors big parties. So what we have right now in the parliament, we have a party where bigger parties are slightly rewarded when using don't system. So if we want better representation, Sant League will be slightly better because Sant League favors or gives equal weight to parties. It's basically more proportional. So if we want more representation or better representation in the lower chamber of parliament, we could consider using Sant League system. But then also there are issues like compulsory voting or two-day voting. Is it something we should consider or not? So this discussion about electoral reform, I think it's a very important discussion, and I wish one day we start talking about it seriously. And it is an important discussion in the context of low turnout.
Second round. So we'll have a second round of questions now. We are going to take 3 again.
Excuse me, I'd like to add one thing about voting system.
Oh, okay.
As you remember, Mr. Cookies in a presidential campaign made the voting system a central point of his propaganda, and then we have a referendum, as you heard, and what was the percent of people voting in referendum? 7%. You know, it was a disaster, and this reflects the common interest in the voting system changes.
We just don't answer stupid questions.
Okay, this is the first question.
Right. Oh, I thought you would take 3.
Yeah, you
Right.
are the first.
Okay, I'm the first. Okay, brilliant. My name is Dr. Gusha Turner, and I'm just a humble voter. The first, I would like to make a comment of watching the public current affairs in Poland for quite some time, sitting here. And my impression was that, and probably that's obvious for you being in Poland, but over the past months or weeks of campaign, you know, it's everyone, Mrs. Szydło, she's there, she's nice, Szydłobus, and now I open my computer on Monday morning and it's Kaczyński everywhere, right? Really, really bizarre.
Also here.
Yes, exactly, even here, right? So it's really, really bizarre that you see her for a long time, and then, well, obviously we know who stands behind it, but for me, looking at it, it's like quite amusing. But my question is about church. Nobody actually mentioned church so far, and immense presence of church in public discourse in Poland. What does it mean now that peace is at power, and is it going to get worse?
Can we have the second one? Yes, please.
So I have some questions about parties that lost the election. So I was wondering if you could say anything about the future of Civic Platform, what's going to happen with their leadership, are they going to go in a sort of key direction? And also with elected Poland, is the Democratic Left Alliance going to survive, or do you think there's going to be, do you think the elected Poland is simply dead, or are they going to emerge in some new way? And finally, I just wanted to ask about sort of the social anger that there's been a lot in Poland recently, so especially lots of young people who feel sort of excluded from the economic system. And Law and Justice promised a lot of sort of reforms in that area. Do you think any reforms are going to happen? And do you think there's going to be something done about that anger, or do you think it's going to be growing more and more?
And Thomas Posner.
Yeah, just a question on comparison to Central Orban. I know most of you on the panel have said that there's not really a comparison to be made. I read Timothy Gordon-Ash in The Guardian yesterday as well, who followed a similar argument. But just, you know, it's very difficult to compare countries and to compare historical epochs, but peace now have complete power, and there is the potential for them to use referendums. There is Kaczynski's claim that the local elections were falsified last year. There is the consistent talk about small links, which is really indicative of a very worrying attitude towards authority. So maybe things won't go exactly towards Hungary, but is there not quite a lot of potential here for, you know, the chipping away at liberal democracy that people should be very concerned about, even if it's not going to be like Hungary?
Who would like to start?
Maybe with about the future of platform?
Okay.
So what about the future of Civic Platform? must know that we were expecting something as a Ewa Kopacz effect after Donald Tusk moved away to Brussels. And it was such a phenomenon, maybe lasting 4, 6, 8 weeks, that the ratings of civic platform went up by 5 or 6, maybe 10%. But in fact, civic platform was born as a civic organization having a number of leaders. It was a team. Donald Tusk was not alone. He had Maciej Płażyński on his right and Andrzej Olechowski on his left.
And Leszek Balcerowicz behind.
And Leszek Balcerowicz as a ghost, just in a shadow. So it was a civic organization. And after 10 years, it was a transformation of such a civic organization into one-man party. So Donald Tusk lost his dream team and team thinking, just eliminating important players from his team. So in this sense, he was just next to Jarosław Kaczyński as a singular leader of the party. And just after he left Poland and went to Brussels, there was a question in civic platform. If we have a person enough charismatic and experienced to replace Tusk and to follow this way of activity, and Mrs. Kopacz was just chosen. She had not a career like Tusk from the bottom up to the top. So, and from my point of view, it was a mistake. I mean, a fundamental mistake. Because she's not enough charismatic, she's not enough experienced, she has not enough kindness that Tusk has or had. She was not able to handle. So finally, going to elections, we had the vision, even the poster, election poster of singular woman alone, and a party behind. It was not enough to convince people that this party has a strong leader. And it was one of the reasons of the tragedy and the loss. So what about the future? I think that they are just following the way of Freedom Union, the Union of Freedom. The party of Balcerowicz, Geremek, and others, and Mazowiecki, who was very strong and reforming force at the beginning of the 90s, and which disappeared like fog. That's a danger. So today they have a question, and of course they have elections too, probably at the beginning of next year, about leadership. How to construct a new vision of leadership. If they have anybody who is enough charismatic to be a singular leader, or to reconstruct the dream team idea. The problem is that there is no personalities to be members of the dream team today, because people like Schetyna were distracted by Tusk. Maybe 5 years ago he was able to run the show, to be a single leader. Today, absolutely not. So, if I can guess the future, I think that probably Ewa Kopacz will be a leader again. She will be elected, and the party will lose support, maybe making space for newcomers like Petru.
Look, I think we should look what parties did very carefully, because and what they haven't done, and leave the speculation about the future, because what PiS has done was very important. and some people will say cynically, but we don't know. They replaced symbolic politics by social policy. I mean, it makes a difference. You campaign about pensions or purges in secret services or the smallest things. And they were radical initially for doing this, but they actually made them homework. And the social program is full of holes. We don't know how they will pay it, but they work for months to prepare it and to make it comprehensive. Now, PO realized at the end that this is where voters go, because they've seen opinion polls, and try to move to this field too. But they lack credibility. Partly because, the voter will not entrust, the task of getting rid of precariat to those who created it in the first place. And partly, and partly because basically, if you make the major the person responsible for electoral program a symbol of neoliberal politics like Lewandowski, what you want? I mean, when he tries to speak about social issue, and he chokes. So we shouldn't ignore those kind of things. Now, it is easier said than done, because we know from other countries that all efforts to introduce meaningful social policies, were challenged by the markets, which were particularly not sympathetic to this, And in my view, Mitterrand was the last one who tried and failed, and nobody on the left even tried to do it. So it will be not so easy to do that. And in the lack of progress on this front, symbolic politics can re-emerge. But I don't assume that the choices they've made were just tactical for those elections and tomorrow they won't just... No, they might be forced by the situation, because the very moment you cannot deliver on your promises, which are in the sort of material world, you go back to symbolic politics. And this might happen, and if you ask me for danger, it is this one. And not the danger that Duda Szydło will be just implementing instructions of Macierewicz and others, I don't think this worked this way. Even in Russia, I've seen when Medvedev was president, there was permanent struggle between, advisors of Medvedev and Putin. And in Poland, it's totally different game. Poland is democracy.
I hope so. Well, the problem of the left and of the PO seems to me to be very similar, in fact. Because both of these parties started with democratic agenda. And this was liberal, more liberal left in the SLD, and more liberal conservative in PO, but anyway it was liberal democratic. And both of these parties very soon turned into classical republicanism from democratic position. More and more power to executive, less and less to elected bodies. In the party, in local governments, in the parliament, and in the national government. And it created the democratic vacuum. What they were able to do was using personal resources or social resources they got on the very beginning. No new people. Are there any new people in the governing body of the left or of the PO? Apart from extremely young people who were invited to join and who has no power, in fact, no influence within the organization. There are, sorry to say that, gentlemen like us. I mean, old guys, everybody knows, and so on. Yes? So if there is no new energy, it's extremely difficult. It's not because there's a coincidence. There's a system. There's a system of self-replication of governing bodies of the party. That they sit Józek and Marysia and Krzysia and they say, well, we three are the best and we will stay in this place. That's how it works. Eventually they turn places. I mean, Schetyna is the Speaker of the Parliament and then the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Minister of... and so on and so on. No new people. Not because they don't want, but because the mechanism is closed. Republican mechanism is closed by definition. Yes. So what happens then? New people appear, and they go somewhere. We are very lucky. They went to the peace. Most of them. If most of them would go to Ruch Narodowy, for example, this would be a disaster. Mm-hmm. But the story is not finished yet. I mean, if peace will not open space for those people, they will move further right. Mm-hmm.
Creating Jobbik in Poland.
Or whatever. Yeah. Or some of them perhaps could move to the left, but not to the United Left, which is Republican. In fact, I mean, two gentlemen agreed to nominate a young, nice lady, I very admire her, but she's just a nominee of these two old apparatchiks. Yes. So the question of future of Polish politics is whether we are suitable, culturally suitable, to create democratic entities, to create democratic parties. Parties that are democratic internally, not only, I say, officially. Yes? That's the problem. Tusk had to be a dictator within the PO, because otherwise nobody would follow him. In my opinion, this is the substantial problem. Look at Petru. This is the party of Petru. Are there any this kind of parties in the old democracies? Is there a party of Rockefeller in the USA? I mean, it's undemocratic by nature, and that's the cultural problem Poland faces now. Sorry so long.
I'll continue this argument about democracy. I'll talk about Polish democracy as a whole. And I would argue that Polish democracy has very strong foundations, and we shouldn't forget about the achievements of the Polish democracy over the past decades. But I also want to point out one possible challenge in the context of the election results. So if we look at the composition of the lower chamber of parliament, the upper chamber of parliament, and the office of the president, we can see that one political party dominates all these offices. So if we talk about accountability, and accountability is a vital element of any democracy, it's extremely important. And here specifically I talk about institutional accountability. So to what extent there are checks and balances in a democratic system. And checks and balances should be really guaranteed constitutionally, but also there should be in practice. So let's look at the Polish situation right now. Law and Justice has the majority in the Senate. Law and Justice has the majority in the lower chamber of parliament, and the candidate proposed by Law and Justice became the Polish president. So how can we guarantee checks and balances in such a system? And it is vital. It is vital because we don't want the situation where there are no checks and balances or they are completely ignored. And I think here there are two institutions which are very important, or two actors, political actors, which are very important. The first one, the opposition. So the role for the opposition to implement and to perform a very serious role of keeping the government accountable on everyday basis. What voters can do, the voters can keep the government accountable, but only on the election day, so every 4 years, if the early elections might happen before. So the role of the opposition is to keep the government accountable on a regular basis. And the second institution, which is very important in a democratic system, especially in Europe, is a constitutional court, or in Poland, constitutional tribunal. So it is very important that we respect, but we also recognize the importance of this institution for maintaining democratic quality in Poland. We can also talk about other issues. We can talk about representation, but I think this issue was already mentioned, that the left is not represented, and what can we do about it, coming back to this previous point about the electoral system. We can talk about participation, but we've already mentioned this issue, but still I would say that really the main challenge would be accountability, keeping effective accountability in Poland over the next 4 years.
Still have time for more questions. Okay, Paweł Surowicz was first, you were second, Jonathan, you are third. In that order, please.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, colleagues, for the presentations and exciting comments. That was really interesting. I've got two quick questions. The first one is about your comments and remarks about the quality of political campaigning in the run-up to the elections. Which is simply interesting to know your thoughts. If political parties in Poland have done anything differently so far to engage electorate in this particular political event. And the second question is about Polish foreign policy. What is it we can actually expect? Do you think there will be any significant redefinition of Euro-focused foreign policy? What do you think we can expect in terms of developing ties or closer ties with Russia? Because the reason I'm asking those questions is because particularly Law and Justice can develop anti-Russian and anti-European policy. So that they have a certain credibility and they mark a certain credibility. I'm just wondering if you have any views on how they may move forward with that. That's my question.
Mm-hmm. The second person, yes, please.
Yes, I just wanted to say that nobody really here explained why peace has won. The explanation that it was replaced by Kotac, who doesn't have to charisma, perhaps that accounts for a few percent, but not for 1.5 million of voters who switched from Platforma to PiS. And I think you should really have mentioned all the scandals, not just with one word, but perhaps you should mention the details, because not everybody here in this audience should know about it. Not everybody follows the independent media, and perhaps it's possible that you wouldn't have heard of it from the main media, or at least you wouldn't have known the importance of it and the real weight of it, because everything was the government tried to explain that it's not at all important, that these Polish ministers who were discussing very cynically politics with oligarchs and other politicians in restaurants.
But I think you're anticipating the answer, so let's hear actually Jonathan's Luxembourg.
Sorry, nobody has answered the question about the church, which I
Mm-hmm.
think
Yeah.
there was certainly being champagne popping in all the bishops' curios on Sunday night, but how is that relationship likely to play out? And my own question, just not that one, concerning British-Polish relations in particular, it's a little bit connected with the foreign policy question. This is a government which will want to be seen to be defending the interests of Poles abroad, including within the EU. Given how the EU and immigration debate is likely to play out in Britain over the next 2 years, could we expect some sort of tension?
Look, on the church, this is a hot potato. But then we're living in a country that that the head of the state is the head of the church too. So you know, the notions of divisions between state and church can be peculiar in different countries. And it is certainly very peculiar in Poland. What I think it is interesting to observe on this front is, see, and here compare a little bit Italy with Poland, because in Italy, politicians on the left even do not dare to cross with the church openly. Renzi, you know, he is leader of the left party, but gosh, he speaks like old good Christian Democrat. As a matter of fact, he was Christian Democrat when he was young. So if you start as a student as a Christian Democrat, imagine. But what I want to say is this, that so I've seen the way in which church could influence politics and at least neutralize some things. But in Poland it's much more. In Poland, the parties wouldn't openly try to challenge the church, but they wouldn't run conservative church agenda. I think that there are politicians within PiS who are prepared to do that, I have a feeling. And it will be interesting to see whether the whole modernization theory has any value as applied in particular to young voters, whether this will work. Because I believe that, I think our guest from Poland already said that this would be an arena when they will try to assert themselves. But I'm not sure whether it will be translated in the votes. And you have to understand that the first thing politicians think after elections is how to win next ones. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the answer. Maybe our guests know. But I think it is very tricky, because if they will push the fundamentalist religious agenda by choice, then it will be interesting to see how the voters will respond. Look, Poland defined modernization theory many times in the past, and may do it once again. But I don't think you can push this without paying a price. We will see.
First about church, and second about tape scandal. So what about the church? It's too much to say that church was not engaged in campaign. But first of all, it's necessary to say that Polish church is very deeply divided. And these are different lines of division. First of all, it's divided into West and East. Because East Poland is much more conservative than the West. And for example, there was no cases of engagement of priests in churches in campaign in the West Poland. But it was pretty common in the East Poland. I will give you a case. My colleague, a young lady, was a candidate from Nowoczesna, in the somewhere between Białystok and Lublin, close to Russia, to Belarusian border. And she had a nice conversation with her grandmother. The question was, "Grandma, will you vote for me?" And the answer was, my kid, I would, but the priest in the church says to vote for another guy, for peace, so I can't." And that's a mechanism. What about bishops? I mean, the church itself as a system, it was not engaged. I had a number of news from the episcopate that the general message was not to intervene, not to engage the church. And that's another part of the story. What about PiS? PiS was instrumentally using arguments, just coming to church appeals about values, solve the problems of in vitro adoption, etc., or partnership. partners' relations. This is part of the lecture of the Polish Church. But I think that Law and Justice was very cynical about using these instruments in campaign. So, I mean that energy was coming from party, not from the church. What about tape scandals? It was one event that changed the history. It was a night intervention of secret services in a weekly Wprost offices. Weekly Wprost, our colleagues, journalists, they had tapes, they had a kind of access to tapes recorded by some people. No one knows finally who these people are. There are some waiters and some businessmen just standing behind them. And they were recording appointments, conversations among politicians and business people for a long time, almost 2 years, year and a half, in some restaurants, 3 of them. So, what stupidity of Polish political class, but they were constant places of meetings. Not different places all over Warsaw, but in a special rooms in 3 restaurants. And we have a trial now, and I think that we will have some official messages from the trial, but probably it was somebody behind these 3 people, businessmen and waiters. But they gave an access to these tapes to Wprost weekly. And it was a news from Wprost that they will publish some of these tapes another day. And the night before, it was action of secret services at night. It was just about midnight. And they wanted to take these tapes. Because all TV stations were there. So we had a live cover of events in Wprost weekly. With fights among journalists and secret agents. It was, terrible. Finally, another day in the morning, Prime Minister Tusk had a press conference early in the morning, just 8 or 9, and he promised that all the case will be solved pretty quickly. All the tapes will be revealed, etc., etc. And it was the final word he said, because nothing happened later. First of all, the actors of these tapes stayed in the government. There was no restrictions. Majority of them went away from government
after Tusk.
After Tusk went to Brussels. So it was the Kopacz decision to clear the government of very famous people, Rostowski, Sikorski, and others.
Oxford people.
Oxford people, yeah. Oxford coming people. So,
They like octopus.
So it was kind of coup d'etat, I think, what happened in Warsaw that night. And it was the beginning of a chain of disasters that the Civic Platform suffered.
I don't want to be cruel, but in my opinion, situation is much worse than it seems from these stories, because this is just a story. I said story, it happens in different countries, and it shouldn't change the world, but it does. It changes the world. And the problem is, in my opinion, not in political campaign, not in this lack of integrity, of political integrity, moral integrity, and so on. But the problem is in the answer to 2 questions that has been raised. One is why peace won, and the other is the position of the church. That's not the problem of whether priests ask somebody to vote for somebody, or whether bishops are neutral or are not neutral. That's 1/4 of a century of intensive everyday public education in a very specific way of a very specific Catholicism of Poland. That's not the problem of Catholicism, of Christianity. It's a problem of Polish Catholicism, which is medieval and doesn't suit to democratic society and market society. And if you start to teach this kind of division of the world, already in preschools, and if you give like 3 hours of indoctrination in this way in preschools and 2 hours throughout entire schooling system, then you have output. It must be an output. If you definitely cancel philosophy in entire system and the humanities, yes, we try to teach Polish. What it means, teaching Polish. These are those low-quality patriotic stories written in 19th century. What is it? What kind of society one could get with this kind of indoctrination? Yes, only this kind of society which is voting for peace or for cookies.
But these people are 50 or 60, so we are referring to the past education, not common education, Jacek.
What do you mean?
No, the
I mean those people who voted for cookies were in their majority product of education of the free Poland. We are produced by we Democrats in the older generation were produced by the communist state, and the democratic state produced this kind of people. I mean, this is major cultural shift that happened since 1989, especially in 1990, when religion has been brought to schools. And it created not only, that's not the problem of whether people believe in God or not. That's the problem what explain social processes. Whether you try to give to them a sociological explanation or a philosophical explanation, or whether you say that's what the God want. That's the problem. And I mean, in most of European societies, in schools, religion is taught, but also philosophy, ethics, history of culture, and so on and so on. Not in Poland, and the art. So that's why I think, and now very short, I try to be very short. About foreign policy, foreign politics. Well, in my opinion, for law and order, foreign politics is in the first course the output of internal politics. I mean, Jarosław Kaczyński doesn't speak any foreign language. It says something about a politician who is active in politics as a professional politician for almost half a century, in Free Poland 25 years or more, 27, and he never intended to learn any language for this amount of time. It says something about how he sees his world. I mean, he doesn't need any knowledge of what's abroad. He doesn't feel that. The West, the East, the South, the North, it doesn't exist. Only it exists when it influences directly Poland. And then it's problem for the army, or for the internal ministry, or whatever. I think this brings us to the point where the answer is. And my answer would be, if the entire world around Poland would disappear, it would be best for Poland. In this narrative, yes, unfortunately, you don't want to disappear, then we'll try to deal with you to prevent you from disturbing us to live as you like, as we used to live for generations, to stay ourselves.
Yeah, very quickly, I want to also answer this question, why peace has won, because I do think it's a very interesting question and puzzle, really. And there is an interplay of different factors, and already several factors were mentioned, so I'm not going to repeat them. But I want to refer to one theory in comparative politics, which is called economic voting. And basically the main argument is that the voters reward the governments for good economic performance, and then they punish the governments for bad economic performance. Obviously, if we look at the case of Poland, in 2011 we can say, yes, we can confirm this hypothesis, but then in 2015 we have a problem, obviously. So it's not economic performance. So then what are the factors? And I think we will be able to answer this question fully only when we have very specific results about who voted for peace. But for me, it is an interesting puzzle, given the fact that that economic conditions, economic situation, Poland growing. I mean, they are very important factors. Yet the government was not re-elected. So in the light of existing literature on economic performance, economic voting, electoral accountability, we have a very interesting case which should be examined further.
I'm afraid we will have to closing our debate. I just wanted actually to finish it with the quote from Dorota Masłowska's play Między nami dobrze jest. There is a specific moment in the course of the play when the narrator says, "And God created men, and they were all the Poles." It's a sort of reference basically to Jacek Żakowski's comments on Jarosław Kaczyński. Then the Germans basically came, obviously, on Jarosław Kaczyński's worldview. Jan Zielonka was asking me the question whether David Cameron actually speaks any foreign languages. As you can see, there are also plenty of subtexts and subplots. But please join me in thanking our speakers for this very illuminating discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes.